Well, good morning, class. Welcome again to the first chapter of our summer discussion, which is an overview of employment law. Now, again, as I mentioned, there's no assignment this week. I wanted you, I didn't want to just, throw everything at you. I want to kind of ease you into this class because, again, a lot of what we talk about, it's really good, but it can be kind of dense at times. So I want to make sure that, you don't bog yourself down in a lot of the minute details. I just want to make sure with each week that you kind of understand the main highlights and the main points. So each week I'll do a short video like this to make sure that you're reading and understanding the parts that I think are really important. For chapter one, overview of employment law, I love what in the opening they talk about how employment law is dynamic. And I could not agree more. Again, I've been in employment law for the vast majority of my career. And I can say, it's not, the laws sometimes change, yearly, sometimes even monthly, the employment laws can change, whereas if you look more like criminal statutes and criminal law, or even in certain aspects of like tax law or corporation law, most of those laws tend to be somewhat consistent over time. But employment law literally changes all the time. Here in Illinois, for example, just recently, Illinois passed a new employment law that provides a lot more protection for pregnant employees and for nursing mothers. Again, there was always protections, but now with the recent Illinois employment laws, there's actually even more protections in those areas for those individuals. So again, these laws can change dynamically all the time. I think that's why I kind of naturally progressed into employment law when not only before I went to law school, but especially after I graduated law school, because I was just so fascinated with how the employment relationship governs, our working relationship with not just with ourselves and our coworkers, but with our corporations or whatever organization we work for. Your book talks a lot about the different sources of laws. And again, make sure you kind of understand where our laws come from. Obviously, they come from statutes that, Congress passes or our state assemblies pass. All the regulations and guidelines from other government agencies, such as the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or the Illinois or Missouri Commissions on Human Rights. So those guidelines and regulations that are passed that way. Our U.S. presidents can pass executive orders. Our governors can pass executive orders on how our laws and things develop. So again, that's kind of more of a general aspect of the different sources of laws, but make sure you kind of know what the major sources of how our employment laws come to develop. There's a great discussion about the idea behind employment at will. And employment at will is a term that we will use all semester long. And essentially what I want you to know is, unless you have a contract, that specifically takes your employment. Most professional athletes have contracts. A lot of, high-level executives in companies have contracts. Actors in Hollywood movies have contracts. Musicians have contracts. But outside, unless you have a specific contract that governs your employment, you are considered employment at will. And essentially what all employment at will means is you can leave the organization for any reason, and the organization can let you go for any reason, assuming they're not violating any laws or statutes or regulations that protect you in certain areas. Essentially, you can leave whenever you want. They can get rid of you whenever they want. Now, obviously, obviously there's protections against, race, religion, national origin. So they can't say, oh, well, because you're a woman, I'm firing you, or because you're Hispanic, I'm firing you. Obviously, that's very illegal. But outside of the protected characteristics and things that are not prohibited by law, the employer can end the relationship at any time. And by the same token, you can end the relationship at any time. Because, if you have a contract, for example, it usually says that you will guarantee you that you will work for this employer for the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, however. But if you're in employment at will, you can leave whenever you want, and you don't even necessarily have to give notice. You can just leave and move on to another employer. So the employment at will relationship is something that we'll be talking about all semester long. So make sure that you fully understand what employment at will means. The next discussion talks about the different rights that employees have. And again, this is less important now and more important as we move forward into the later chapters of the semester. But, kind of the main things that I want you to know that employees have rights is make sure you understand, non-discrimination and equal opportunity and equal employment opportunity. That, we have the right to not be discriminated against based on our race, our religion, our national origin, our sex, our sexual orientation, things along those lines that we have the right to be prohibited from. firm. We have the right as employees to engage in concerted activity and collective bargaining. Now, those are more union type terms that I'll discuss later in the semester, but we have the right to discuss the terms and conditions of our employment. We have the right to talk about our salary and our performance evaluations with whoever, kind of almost whoever we want, unless we sign away those rights, and those are usually only in union agreements. But we have the right to engage in that type of activity to make our workplace better. And of course the laws, like the Fair Labor Standards Act that give us a certain minimum wage, or the Occupational Safety and Health Act, which gives us a safe workplace. We have the right to all those things that are embedded in federal law and in state law as well. So as employees, we have a ton of rights, but again, a lot of these rights kind of go, we don't really talk about them, or they're not really discussed on a day-to-day basis. So, but again, make sure you kind of have a good understanding of what rights we have as employees. And shortly thereafter, there's a quick discussion about, the different venues that we're in. If you're a public, employer versus a private employer. If you're in a union environment versus a non-union environment. Those types of settings, the type of work that you're in or the type of organization you're in does affect to a certain degree what kind of rights that you have. And again, I don't want you to worry as much about that right now, because as we get in much more detail later in the semester about those details, I'll share that with you. But just know that depending on what, if you're a public versus a private, those things matter with your employment relationship. A little bit further in the chapter, Figure 1.1 gives you a timeline of major U.S. employment laws. I don't expect you to memorize that figure, but just know that is a great source for you to come back to, because we will be referencing the vast majority of those laws as we go throughout the semester. But it's a good idea to kind of at least read through those and kind of remember the names, because again, they'll be relevant as we move forward through the different aspects of this class. And then the last thing that I want you to know for this week is, if your rights are violated, or if you are discriminated against, or, somebody fires you illegally, what is the process for you to seek redress, for you to, sue your employer, or to, bring a wrongful termination lawsuit, things along those lines. Again, your book kind of does an overview of that for chapter 1. Again, we're going to be getting into much more of the weeds in that in the second half of this class. So again, don't necessarily need you to memorize that section, but at least kind of get a general idea of what has to happen before you can sue your employer, or what has to happen before you can bring a lawsuit. Again, I will provide much more details about that later in the semester, but that's just kind of a general overview. Well, those are the highlights for chapter 1. Again, just make sure you kind of have a general idea of what we've discussed. And again, each week I will build, and I will try throughout the semester to try to give you a few hints about questions that I think will be good for our exams that I want you to make sure you pay particular attention to. So thanks again, everybody. This is chapter 1. Again, just make sure you read it this week, and that's the only thing that you have to do. Starting next week, next Monday, I'll open it up to a much broader discussion, and we will go from there. Thanks, everyone. Read chapter 1, and I will see you next week.